Welcome back, dear listener, to The World Asleep. Tonight the wind combs through bare branches like a slow, remembering hand, and a pale, full moon lays its chilled coin of light across cobblestone streets. From porches and windowsills, pumpkins grin with wicked, flickering smiles. Candle flames waver, casting thin, wandering silhouettes that stretch and shiver over brick and door. Somewhere, a latch lifts. Somewhere, a gate clicks shut. The air smells faintly of smoke and damp leaves, and the world seems to breathe a little slower, as if pausing to listen. This is Halloween, a night of costumes and laughter, sugared footsteps and rattling candy pails. Yet beneath the playful masks lies an older face, rituals and wardings, harvest endings and winter thresholds, stories carried by hearth and hedge and church bell. We will drift through those layered rooms of memory, the hilltop fires of Samhain, the tolling hush of All Hallows, the whispered names of saints, and the quicksilver shadows of witches and wandering spirits, not to fear them, but to understand the doorways they mark. If these quiet journeys bring you peace, consider liking and subscribing. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Are you near the bright, festive glow of jack-o'-lanterns, or wrapped in the soft silence of the season's mysteries? Wherever you are, breathe with me now and step gently. Together we'll enter the dark and see what it remembers. Chapter 1. The Celtic Origins, Samhain High. On a hill where the grass lies close to the bone of the earth, a thin mist drifts like breath over heather and stone. The cold has a taste, iron and peat, the mineral hush of approaching winter. Sheep paths braid the slope, thorn and gorse hold their silhouettes against a sky the colour of poured slate. Below, fields stand stubbled and amber, their harvest taken, their furrows dark with thanks. The day wanes early, distant water glints and goes out, and along the ridge, fires climb from stacked wood, their flames slow and steady, as if the hill itself has remembered how to be a lantern. You stand near one of those fires. Sparks rise, burdened with nothing, and vanish into the damp. The people gathered here have the posture of those who know both labour and season, hands scarred by tools, faces mapped by wind, eyes that measure the light the way a sailor measures tide. Someone carries a bundle of herbs, someone else a vessel of last season's ale. Children, so small they're almost ash shadows, lean into the radiance, half terrified and half thrilled. All around, the night breathes in, breathes out. The hill is a drum, and the drum beat is the careful turn of the year. They call this turning Samhain. Not just an evening, but a hinge, the end of the bright months when the sun walked higher and the grass spoke in green, and the beginning of the dark, when the ground keeps its counsel, and the air becomes an archivist of frost. The fields are finished, the stores laid by, the animals counted and brought close. Doors that stood open for weeks learn again the grammar of latches, and across the threshold between old light and new darkness, the people keep watch with flame. Listen long enough, and the language of the fire arrives. It says, "Now is the time for endings that are not endings, for what has ripened to be given back, for the seen world and the unseen to touch, briefly, like two hands in the same pocket of night." On this night, so the old stories breathe, the veil thins. That other country, the one that rides parallel to ours and hums with remembered footsteps, draws near. Ancestors find the road home. Those without names too, the wandering ones, learn the shape of a hearth again. It is not a threat, not entirely. It is a negotiation between fear and reverence, warmth and wind, the assurance of harvest and the candour of winter's gaze. Out at the edge of the firelight, figures move. Not spirits, not yet, but people wearing the suggestion of spirits. Masks are lifted, faces are borrowed. A man pulls a rough pelt over his shoulders, makes himself larger than his own shadow, and becomes, if only for a little while, a creature that the night might hesitate to chew. A woman binds her hair, smudges ash along her cheekbones, and the darkness gives her a different name. Children practice being trees, owls, briars. It is a strange comfort. If the unknown comes looking, let it find a stranger in your place. To the west, a second fire flares, and then a third, and one more beyond that, a chaplet of orange along the rim of land. In some valleys the herds will be driven between twin pillars of flame, an old custom made of caution and blessing, a way to wash with light what cannot be scrubbed clean with water. Smoke threads the evening like incense. The scent of juniper and rowan leans over the gathering. In some houses a place at the table stands open, a cup waiting, a slice of bread uncut. Hunger is an old traveller, and it is best to show it hospitality when it comes with familiar faces. In others, doors are marked in chalk, as if words could anchor a threshold more securely than wood. Samhain is a work of memory. It teaches the tongue to say, without flinching, the earth's quiet sentence that we end, and in ending, turn. It asks a people to meet their dead, not as a parade of dread, but as a recognition of belonging, as if the family album could open itself and the photos might step down to sit by the fire again. It is not celebration alone, it is accounting. What was planted, what was taken, what remains, what cannot be kept. The questions arrive in wool and weather and the long arithmetic of days, and the answers are as patient as stone. In the telling, Samhain is older than almost any roof still standing. It climbs with the language of hills and rivers more than the language of ink. Yet for all its age it feels intimately present, because each year remakes the room where we ask the same trembling things. The people here keep records, not in ledgers, though those will come in centuries ahead, but in routes of migration, in which trees were spared for their standing grace, in where the cattle found good shelter in a storm. And they keep another sort of record, the map of stories. There's a path through the mind the fires open, a corridor lined with silhouettes, heroes, kin, a few tricksters, a few enemies, who lean out and bless or warn as we pass. Perhaps some of those silhouettes are ours later and later, doubling back to look upon us. If you listen to the ground underfoot, you can hear the larder of the land, its big quiet. After the season's bright noise, the last berries have gone, the bracken frosts white at dawn. In the marsh, the reeds hold ice like a secret. There is sorrow here, yes, but also relief. The body of the countryside needs to lie down. So do the people. An autumn of labour has its own ache. Samhain speaks a permission. Rest. And in resting, do not forget that the world is made of many rooms. Tonight, the doors between them open a finger's width. Only a fool would push them wide. Only a fool would nail them shut. The wise stand with a candle and a story, and they watch. This watchfulness is a kind of guarding, but it is also play. What we fear becomes a mask. What we honour becomes a ritual, not for spectacle, but for a rehearsal of courage. To call what frightens you by a borrowed name, wolf, crow, cold rider, is to give it a boundary, however faint, and to practice your own. The children learn this with clumsy, delighted hands, chalking circles no one can see, whispering passwords that begin as nonsense and become, through use, a kind of invisible fence. The elders smile and do not contradict them. Protection, like belief, is something we learn by doing. Across the hill, someone begins a low song. It is sparse as frost and steady as breath. Others find the tune, and a round begins. The melody is simple enough to be rememberable in winter, to be sung between the tasks that carry us through the grey months, mending, stirring, sweeping, counting. In the song are old lines about gates and guardians, about the names of fires and the geography of dawn. History in these places is not lecture but chant, facts given the courtesy of rhythm so they may stay awake in the dark. If we translate the customs of Samhain into ideas, they look almost modern in their clarity. Acknowledge ending, mark the threshold, balance grief and gratitude, make place for what you cannot control. Disguise yourself against the opportunism of fear. Feed what you love and show courtesy to what you dread. But the festival does not feel like a set of concepts. It feels like standing in air that lifts the hair at your wrist, like ash under your fingernails, like the soft shock of looking toward the dark and finding there not only absence but attention. It is a posture of the heart as much as a rite. The scholars will later give us timelines and glossaries. They will note the way agricultural cycles govern human meanings, how the end of harvest invites both accounting and imagination. They will track the slender filaments by which ancestral veneration becomes household custom and local law. They will be right. And yet there is an extraness here, an atmosphere that analysis can admire but not contain. Perhaps it is the human genius for thresholds, the way we stand where two things meet and for a moment are more alive than in either room alone. Look again at the masks, the people in the pelts and the ash, the children crowned in leaves, the elders with their herbs and careful hands. If the dead truly walk tonight, who is dressing for whom? Are the living disguising themselves so as not to be recognised by those who once loved them, lest love tug too hard? Or are the dead disguising themselves as beasts and briars, so the living won't be frightened by how like themselves they still are? The old stories will not settle this. They were never meant to. Their work is to furnish a conversation the village can keep having long after the fires sink into coals and the animals drowse in their pens. Once, years from this hill but still within its echo, someone will say that Samhain is the hour when time becomes a little transparent and memory becomes a little solid, and the two exchange gifts. Tonight you can feel that exchange in your chest, a small loosening, a quiet tightening. You think of the names you keep and the names you've lost. You think of the winter ahead, its reserves decanted slowly, its mornings thick with slow light and breath cloud, its evenings exact with stars. And you think of this flame and this company, and the understanding that comes when a community admits, softly, without bravado, that the world is larger than our plans. And so the fire burns, and the people bless the cattle, and the masked children practice their art of being slightly more than they are. A plate stands waiting for those who might arrive hungry and half-remembered. Doors are marked, lintels are touched. The hill learns the shape of a watch night. The cold deepens, but not cruelly. The moon, white as a blade laid flat, watches without judgment. Samhain is not only history, not only harvest. It is our earliest technology for speaking to the unknown without breaking it. To dress the fear, to feed the guest, to keep the flame. These are the simple programs our ancestors ran on the hardware of weather and want. They encoded caution and courage into action, and actions into story, and story into the annual software update we still, somehow, download as the leaves turn and the world's breath goes visible. Perhaps this is why the festival lingers under our modern lights, because it offers not certainty but choreography, a way to move with the shadow and not be consumed by it. On the hill, the song quiets. The last rustlings settle in the hedges. Ash flakes land on sleeves and do not melt. Someone banks the fire for safety. Someone else looks toward the valley and gives a small nod that means it's time to go. Home, hearth, the blessed ordinariness of sleep. The path down is slick and familiar, a braided history of going and returning. At your back, the hill holds its ember. Ahead, the houses keep their promise of roofs. Between them, you walk, 1 foot in the world of work and giving, 1 foot in the world of story and returning, both feet learning. Again, the art of thresholds. As centuries unspooled, the custom would not vanish. It would travel, acquire new names, carry other symbols in its pockets. Monks would hear the old songs and answer with bells. Chapels would take the hill's watch and fold it into prayer. The mask would learn the language of halos and candles, and the table kept for ancestors would acquire a book of saints. The hinge would remain, even as the door took on carvings from other hands. And so we step forward, still warm with hill fire, to another room of the story where reverence has a different accent and the calendar changes its clothes, but the night keeps its listening. Chapter 2. The All Saints' Day Connection. The hillfire dims behind us, and the night changes timbre. Stone takes the measure of the wind. A bell rope is drawn by an unseen hand. Across a small meadow rimed with silver, a low cathedral vaults out of the dark like a ship turned upside down. Its ribs of timber, its skin of slate, its narrow windows veined with lead. The bell begins to toll, 1 note folding into the next with patient gravity, as if counting not hours but souls. In the close about the church, yews lean like listening elders. The air smells of wax and damp linen, chalk and old wood. A door opens with a hush, and we step from the weather's rawness into a chamber where breath grows round and soft. Candles are everywhere, small, steadfast islands, lifting thin banners of flame into the dim. Their light pools on flagstones worn concave by centuries of knees and shoes, finds the carved faces along the pew ends, touches the gilt of a painted saint who holds a book in one hand and a palm frond in the other. The great room has its own weather, the faint drift of incense, the low tide of whispered prayers, the flutter of a page turned gently somewhere far down the nave. For a moment, we feel the hill behind us answer with a quieter echo. Bonfires there, beeswax here, musks there, halos here. But the songs hum to each other through the dark like cousins across a valley. History is not a scissor that cuts clean, it is a loom that carries threads forward. In this place, the thread the church gathers is the honouring of the holy, the ones who, in story and in deed, stood so near the light that it shone through them, even when the world was winter cold. Long ago, on another threshold of time, a Roman temple was given new breath. The old pantheon made over to Mary and the martyrs, a May feast fixed, to remember those whose names had become a litany of courage. Centuries later, that remembrance learned a different season. In the 8th century, a pope named Gregory lifted the festival from spring to the very lip of winter, dedicating a chapel at St. Peter's and marking the first day of November for All Saints. Some years after, the whole church would be invited to keep it so, and the night before, October's last, when borders always love to blur, became the vigil. All Hallows' Eve, the evening of the holy ones. Say the words slowly. All Hallows. Hallow as holiness. Hallow as sanctify. Hallow as the hush in the throat before a beloved name. You can feel how the language leans into reverence. Ian, the old contraction of evening, folds itself to fit the mouth in a whisper. Over centuries, syllables were smooth. All Hallows' Eve turns, through the softened corridor of speech, into Halloween. The bell notes join this transformation. They announce a calendar, but they also declare a geography of attention. What matters is near, and we will keep watch. Outside these walls, the year has tipped. Fields have been gathered in. Samhain's hilltop grammar of endings and thresholds still throbs in the ground. The church does not so much erase that language as translate it. For the community that steps from heather to nave, the veil the old songs named as thinning is acknowledged again, but with a different vocabulary. The saints, not the wandering dead, become the nearest company. The harvest of the year finds an answering harvest of lives offered to love, a sheaf of names tied with prayer. Where Samhain made a place at the table for those who might return hungry, All Hallows invites the village to set a table of remembrance for those who learn to feed others even at cost to themselves. Watch how the gestures echo and shift. On the hill, doors were marked with chalk. Here, foreheads will be marked with the sign of a cross. There, a second fire flared to make a safe corridor for cattle to pass. Here, 2 rows of candles are carried down the nave and people process between them with steady steps. There, ash-smudged cheekbones to borrow another face. Here, a saint's image bears an attribute, a key, a wheel, a ladder, not as disguise, but as a story distilled to symbol. There, breath turned visible in the cold and songs rose ragged and heartfelt. Here, breath is made soft in prayer, and the chant rides on a mode that knows the architecture's stones by resonance. That night of vigil, the bell will sometimes toll for the unnamed, the ones whose holiness was quiet or hidden, not found in chronicles but in small fidelities, a widow's loaf cut thinner to share, a shepherd's lantern held steady on a dangerous path, a child's hand taken and not let go. All Saints' Day does not claim to know every name. It keeps a room open for the great commonwealth of those who could be called holy if only we had a longer memory or a kinder index. In that room, the village meets its dead imaginatively again, but without bargaining or fear. Intercession replaces appeasement. Gratitude leans where caution leaned. Not do not harm us, but stay near and teach us courage. And yet the old customs do not vanish like mist at matins. They linger, wearing new clothes. A household that used to set a crust for returning ancestors may now give a small gift to those with no bread of their own. A lantern once cupped to ward off a roving spirit may become a candle lit before a niche where saintly eyes look with carved gentleness. Children who learned the mischief and mastery of masks may still knock at doors, but they carry with them now stories of martyrs and pilgrims, and some households answer with prayers or coins or treats that say, "You have a place here." The festival is not replaced, it is rescored. New notes, old melody. In the shadowed transept a reliquary gleams, polished, not gaudy, a rose of glass and metal with a fragment inside like a seed. A few lines are inked beneath it, a name, perhaps a place, perhaps a death remembered for its refusing to renounce love. To a certain eye, this is odd. Why keep bones, cloth, a trace of what was mortal? But those who lift the glass with reverence are not worshipping the fragment. They are honouring the way love eats its way through fear until what remains is strangely durable. The fragment is a bookmark in a book too large to hold. It tells the fingers where the heart might read again when courage runs low. The liturgy of All Saints is lavish with the plural. It insists that holiness is not a solitary triumph, but a chorale. Names pour like water, famous ones and forgotten ones, reminding the village that no single life completes the pattern. For men and women who, only a night before, stood on a hill and faced the winter's threshold, this is a comfort with weight. The saints are not bright and brittle in this telling. They are weathered, recognisable. They lost and learned and began again. Their miracles, if such things belong to us at all, often arrive as patience, as returning to a promise, as courage that looks exactly like folding laundry and visiting the sick and making a mended thing beautiful as if it had never been broken. And still, beneath the mellow ring of bells and the measured wording of collects, you can hear the older heartbeat, The calendar is wise enough to keep them neighbours. November beckons a second remembrance. All Souls' Day, where the prayers widen from canonised light-bearers to everyone we love who has stepped beyond our reach. Candles are set for grandmothers and potters, for sailors and midwives, for those never held and those held so long the hands still remember the weight. The churchyard becomes a quiet lantern field. If the veil is thin, the thinness does not ask us to bargain. It invites us to belong larger. In lands where harvest and hearth have taught patience, the blending takes on local colour. In the isles and valleys that once kept Samhain most fiercely, All Hallows does not feel like a new road, but like a well-built bridge. Children learn the words for saint and for soul as easily as they learn the words for fern and frost. The priest has ash under his nails from cutting wood for the widow's stove. The farmer bows during the litany and thinks of the neighbours he's buried who are never in any book, but whom heaven must count as its favourite kind of poem. The boundary between hall and hill is a door that swings both ways, and the draught through it smells of smoke and incense, of stew and sacrament. Language itself holds the story of that swing. Hallowmas, hallows Ian, old mouthfuls that taste of parish bells and peat smoke, of borrowed Latin warmed on the tongue of field hands. To call something hallowed is not to make it remote, but to acknowledge the thin brightness it carries, as a coal carries fire under ash. A vigil asks you to wait, to keep company with what you love even when it is quiet or absent. This is the church's genius when it is most human, to take what the people already know in their ribs, that endings require watchfulness, that thresholds are meaningful, and to offer a grammar for gratitude there. What does this do to the feeling of the night? It does not bleach it. The uncanny remains, but it is tempered. The saints, far from being only luminous, carry the night well. They suffered. They understood fear. They still walk a little ahead with a lantern that doesn't abolish darkness but makes a path through it. In this light, the old masks begin to look less like defiance and more like rehearsal, a way to practice being brave or kind or hidden or revealed. The church does not forbid the children to play, it blesses the play toward mercy. Knock on the door, receive a gift, say thank you. Learn that the world is made of thresholds, and that good words make them safer. Even the fear of the unknown, which Samhain named with such crisp honesty, receives a different shape here. Holiness does not cancel mystery, it hallows it. Death is not a mouth to be bribed, but a room to be entered in company. The calendar gives us this night and its morning so that we may learn how to say the names of things that frighten us without either bravado or despair. Under the bell, the heart practices a steady beat. If you listen carefully, the bells and the hill fires are keeping the same time, and so the festival we call Halloween inherits a double vision. It remembers the hill's red grammar of thresholds and the nave's gold lexicon of saints. It carries, tucked in one pocket, the old arts of disguise and warding, in the other the litany of those who taught us to love beyond fear. When the door opens to the night and a child stands there masked and expectant, you can hear in that small exchange a very large story, about hospitality and courage, about acknowledging what is strange without refusing it, about the way communities knit themselves against winter by sharing light, sugar and names. But we have not yet asked why certain figures wait at the edges of the lamp's circle, faces half made of shadow and tail. Even as bells toll and candles bless, the imagination peoples the dark with travellers who feel older than doctrine and closer than superstition. Women who keep secrets with the moon, shapes that move like questions through the hedgerow, beings that wear fur and hunger and the rumour of transformation. Who are these companions of the threshold? Why do their silhouettes grow sharper as October leans into November? Perhaps to answer, we must step back into the night and listen for the oldest footsteps that still stir the leaves. Chapter 3. Witches. and the supernatural. A low cottage keeps to the edge of a wood where the path thins and the bracken goes whisper dark. Smoke breathes from a thatch hole, thin as a vein under skin. Inside, a mortar answers a pestle in slow, patient circles. The rhythm is part recipe, part prayer. Dry stems crackle, seeds release their small, peppered sigh, and the room fills with a scent of mugwort and fennel, rosemary, a dare of rue. A kettle murmurs on an iron hook. On the sill, moonlight collects in a basin, a silver the hand can't hold. An owl lands somewhere above the rafters and tilts the night to listening. Outside, the hedge combs a wind that has learned to speak in leaves. A broom leans in the corner, its bristles bandaged in twine as if the day's sweeping were a kind of healing. We stand near the threshold and let our eyes learn the dim. Here are jars labelled in a script the fingers know better than the tongue. Here is thread and wax and the stub of a candle whose smoke remembers yesterday's petition. A cat threads the dark with quiet punctuation. On a table, a length of linen, a needle nested in it like a constellation fallen to the lap. Nothing impossible is happening. Only the modest chemistry of household skill, only the old marriage of plant and fire and intention. And yet the room is charged, as rooms are charged that open onto a larger weather, the kind of weather that makes men murmur as they pass and women lower their voices to the temperature of caution. In the village, doors close a little firmer when the moon is high. Misfortune has walked the lanes lately. A cow's milk has soured. A thatch caught and blessedly went out. A fever gnawed its way through a house and left a chair empty at morning bread. Everything has a cause, the elders say. The righteous insist that God's providence writes no crooked figures. But the eye is human. It looks for a face behind the accident, a will behind the winter, a signature under the smudge of chance. When the granary stumbles and the infant does not rouse, when a storm cuts the fisherman's keel like a black knife, the village searches not only the sky and the conscience, but the hedge, the threshold, the woman in the cottage whose hands smell of herbs and smoke. History's light, when we bring it to this twilight, shows a crowded stage, centuries where fear learned fluent grammar. In Europe's late medieval and early modern era, anxieties bred like sparks in dry straw. Crops failed in seasons that called themselves honest. The climate cooled and tongues called it judgment. Wars of faith split parishes and households, along lines that husbands and wives could not always name without trembling. The village's oldest medicines, midwives' knowledge, cunning folks' bundles of charm and counsel, stood at a contested border. Some priests tolerated the remedies that were prayers by another alphabet. Others condemned even kindness as clandestine pride. The law, catching the wind of zeal, learned new words for suspicion. Manuals were written by men who had never stood in a frost-bitten lane with a failing child, men who believed the devil loved to wear the most ordinary clothing. The accused could be anyone, and often were the ones the village already half feared or half needed. The widow whose independence rubbed like grit in a culture that preferred a woman braided to a man or to a rule. The healer whose remedies succeeded too often for coincidence. The poor who begged and were refused, and then were blamed when a cow stumbled. The quarrelsome, the solitary, the ones whose faces carried a little too much night. Trials flared and spread. Germany, Scotland, France, England, and later, across an ocean, Puritan fields learned the same awful choreography in a new light. Confessions were coerced and shaped. Evidence widened to include the dream that could not be disproved, the bruise no one remembered earning, the doll found where the well bucket hung. Belief knitted a theology out of terror. Sabbaths in the night woods where saints were mocked in counterfeit tables and candles burned with a smoke that stained the moon. pacts written in blood with a pen no eye could see. Flying, how that word inflamed the imagination, on wind or stick or creature familiar. Familiars themselves became a bestiary of condemnation. A toad, a black dog, any cat too clever for its own safety. It was a poor time for small beloved animals, and a poorer time for women whose competence tempted the village to ask, "Who are you to have such knowledge?" Witched, witching, witch. The word darkened like a pot never scoured between stews. To be named was to be neighboured by unanswerable dread. But fear is not the only river that carried this figure through the centuries. Underneath the prosecutions and the pulpit thunder, something else kept walking along the hedge. A figure that wore not only accusation but archetype. The witch, in her oldest habit, is a steward of thresholds, between illness and health, hunger and stockpot, childhood and birth, grief and the washing that follows death. She keeps recipes not because she is pledged to malice, but because the world is complicated and a body is fragile, and sometimes the one who learns a plant's bedside manner is the one who saves a night from becoming a funeral. In many places these were the cunning folk, called upon as one calls for the only rope in a flood. People paid them with coins or bread or gratitude, and then, in lean years or bad moods, repaid them with slander. The same hands that tied a charm for a cow's good milk could be hauled before a bench if the cow later failed. Gratitude has a short memory when fear is hungry. Halloween, learning its manners from both hill and nave, would eventually inherit the witch as one of its night's walking emblems. We see her now on cards and windows and pointed hats that tilt toward mischief, a silhouette flying past a softened moon, a laugh written in jagged lines. But the genealogy of that hat is tangled. Traders wore high, sugarloaf brims. Alewives in market lanes chose practical peaks before fashion learned to sneer at them. Illustrators fixed the point to make the outline legible to the eye that loves symbols more than tailors do. The broom, too, carried into the emblem from the floor's care to the roofline of myth. Household labour turned into a narrow ladder between worlds. The cauldron, the old democratic pot that fed 10 by collecting 10 little offerings, became a theatre for fantasia. Vapours that promised to be more than thyme and onion and the marrow coaxed from bones. And yet, enchanted uncertainty, that is the right way to hold it. Gently, ambiguously, reverently. For if we look closely, we find the figure flickers. She is at once danger and comfort, scapegoat and steward, accused and necessary. In some stories, she bargains with darkness and uses hunger as a tool. In others, she is simply the woman who knew what willow bark could coax from a feverish skull, or how to lay out a beloved body with dignity when the bell stopped ringing because there was no one left who could pull the rope. The line between spell and prayer in a working village is drawn not with a ruler but with breath. The words whispered over a poultice differ only slightly from those whispered over a psalm. So why does this figure cling so to Halloween's sleeve? Because the festival is about thresholds, and she is a threshold embodied. The night we mark as thin between worlds demands a guardian, a guide, a warning, a test. Witches, real and imagined, maligned and mythologized, offer all four. They ask, what will you do with your fear? Learn its grammar and turn it from a liar into a lookout, or pour it onto a neighbour and call the puddle justice. They ask, how will you treat knowledge that cannot sit still under church candles or court statutes? Dismiss it, devour it, or do the slow work of discerning where mercy lives between them? In the hush of the cottage, the kettle lifts its breath. Somewhere a cord is tightened around a bundle of herbs and hung where the smoke will study it and teach it to keep longer. A charm, by which we mean a short, remembered line that leans a person's courage back upright, gets repeated almost idly as the hands work. If you came here at noon on a market day, the same hands would be mending a hem or cutting nettles for soup. The world prefers people to be simple, but they rarely are. To call this woman a witch might be to condemn her to the gallows. To call her a midwife might be to honour her with a loaf and the first taste of the christening ale. Sometimes she is both, in the town's mind, changing with the wind. Our stories keep the doubleness because the doubleness belongs to us. There is also the matter of power, not the kind that sits on thrones or strides into court, but the low domestic current that makes a house work and a winter survivable. The witch, as emblem, gathers every anxiety about female agency into one silhouette, and then sets that silhouette in the sky to be loved or feared at leisure. In some regions, she is a figure fathers use to scare daughters away from ambition. In others, she's a private patron saint of ingenuity and stubborn hope, a reminder that the door has more keys than the ones the magistrate wears at his belt. On Halloween, when we play at both dread and delight, we let children try on that outlined power too. The tall hat feels like a tower of mischief and safety. The broom a staff, the cauldron a stage where ordinary things become more themselves. If we pause in the archive, we must say the sorrow plainly. Many suffered under these accusations, many died. Their names flicker in records where handwriting fights with grief and authority. Agnes, Isabel, Anne, Marjorie. Mothers, daughters, widows, strangers. Villagers learned to fear their own judgment only after it had already acted. The bell that tolled for saints tolled for them as well, though the sound reached the ear differently, wrapped in shame as much as sorrow. Remembering them on this night is part of what Halloween can teach us, that communities sometimes sow a lie into law, and that unpicking that seam is holy work. And still the figure endures, less as indictment than as mirror. What we project upon the witch in any century, malice, wisdom, seduction, resistance, tells us what we most fear or most need. In some ages she is mostly a joke, her silhouette softened by candy and commerce. In others, she returns with sharper edges as people look again to the craft of plants and place, to rituals that rehearse attention and care. Between witch hunts and witch hats lies a long, complicated corridor where the human longing to influence fate meets the humility of not being in charge. To stand at a cauldron, literal or figurative, is to admit we do not make the weather, but we can make soup, and that, on winter nights, sometimes soup is nearly salvation. Step back outside. The cottage door closes with a latch that has learned quiet. The woodline combs the sky with fingers of charcoal. Far across the fields a church bell counts the hour. Nearer, a barn door sounds its tired hinge. On the lane, children pass with the uneven brightness of lanterns in paper bellies. Someone has pinned felt stars to a cloak. Someone else carries a plastic broom that knows nothing of hearths, but still draws a circle of belonging around small feet. Laughter rides the chill and writes warmth into the air. In that play, the hat oversized, the spell nothing more than a mispronounced rhyme, there is a rehearsal of something very old. Courage dressed as jest, unease given a role to perform until it is tired and wanders off to bed. We have visited the hill fire and the nave and the cottage's low lamp. We have named the witch as accusation and as archetype, as neighbour and as emblem, as sorrow and as survival. The night does not grow less mysterious for our naming, it becomes more intimate. Halloween carries her because the festival itself balances on a broomstick's narrow shaft, between the world we can measure and the one we can only imagine. We bow, not to terror, but to complexity, and say, perhaps, 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 enchanted uncertainty, and in that perhaps the heart relaxes its fist. But the lane does not end at this hedge. Beyond the cottage, silhouettes lean where stories cast them. A shape that isn't quite a man, and isn't quite not a man. A paw print too large for the dog you know. A stitched outline stepping out of a lightning's afterimage. A howling somewhere that sounds exactly like a question you haven't answered yet. Witches keep the door, but others pass the threshold. If we would learn why Halloween collects such company, we must walk a little further into the lamp's thin circle where monsters, old as our fears and new as tonight, wait just beyond the reach of the streetlight. Chapter 4. Monsters of the Night. The street is quiet in the cautious way of places that have learned to listen. A sodium lamp hums like a tired bee. Its circle of yellow is a shallow bowl set on the pavement, and just beyond its rim the dark gathers itself, not threatening, merely patient. Your steps find the old cadence of October, leaves like thin paper underfoot, a gust that makes the hedge practice its secret language, the faint metallic rattle of a gate that never quite learned to latch. In a puddle, the moon lies broken and immediately reforms. In a window, a curtain breathes. You tell yourself the shapes are only shapes, the night only night, and the night, polite as always, does not contradict you. Still, something moves where the light refuses to reach, not with the drama of a stage entrance, but with the careful economy of an animal that was here before the road learned to be a road. A branch forgets its posture. A shadow remembers a new angle. A sound crosses a field and sheds its name as it comes. Halloween is hospitable to such presences. The festival knows how to set a place for fear without letting it eat first. And tonight, at the edge of the streetlight's comfort, the old company arrives. The monsters we pretend to have made up, who keep revealing that we made them out of what was already in our hands. The oldest of them walk on paws they borrowed from our stories and legends. Consider the werewolf. Not merely a wolf, not merely a man, but a hinge joining the two, creaking under the strain of appetite and order. In Greek whispers, there was Lycaon, punished for a cruelty that tasted of taboo, turned into what his heart already resembled, hunger on 4 legs. Centuries later, villages in France and Germany spoke the name lycanthrope, with a winter in their throats, and courts, in their zeal to make maps where fear had none, tried and sentenced the accused as if a moon could be notarized. Behind the fable was a truth not about fur, but about the struggle between wildness and the fences we build to live together. The werewolf stands at the gate and asks, what part of you runs when it smells blood? What part returns at dawn ashamed and human again? Close by pads a cousin, the vampire. Not the velveted aristocrat our theatres have taught us to expect, but the older thing that village earth remembers, rumour and sorrow pressed into a figure that rises when grief cannot read its own licence. In eastern valleys, in graveyards where stones lean like tired shoulders, people told each other about the one who would not stay buried, who took more from the living than any famine dared. They told it partly because wasting sicknesses came like quiet thieves and left 2 chairs empty instead of 1. They told it because night sometimes felt like an open mouth. Later, romances would dress the vampire in silk and give it witty loneliness. Commerce would teach it to glitter. But the first vampire stories smelled of turned soil and unblessed thresholds. Their lesson, beneath the fear, was about appetite without end. How societies must learn to say enough to something that would otherwise keep sipping until every cup is empty. Between those two, a figure stitched from pages rather than parish talk, the creature that lightning taught to stand. Mary Shelley wrote by a lake while storms rehearsed their theatre, and her story, about a body assembled from the morgue's leftovers and animated by a knowledge that had not yet learned mercy, has never ceased to breathe. Frankenstein's monster is not a folk demon but a modern mirror, shined with questions that arrived with laboratories and galvanic sparks. What happens when our reach forgets our tenderness? What responsibilities accompany creation? The creature is not, in the first telling, evil. He is unloved, misunderstood, a child made of strong parts and given no grammar for belonging. His rage is the tantrum of exile. That he stands so comfortably among Halloween's masks is no accident. The festival has room for grief that has learned to growl. There are older artisans too who shaped beings to guard and warn. In stories carried through synagogues like warm loaves, a golem rises from clay, at a righteous rabbi's pleading, a protector for a people reaping persecution storms. The letters of the holy name breathe in its chest like a coal. The lesson is double-edged. Creation as defense, but also creation as risk. For every guardian is a question about when to sleep and when to wake. And clay, like law, can be heavy in the wrong hands. Stand the golem in Halloween's doorway, and he looks like a cousin to the stitched creature from the lake house. Both bear the weight of our urge to solve danger by making something strong, and both remind us of the humility needed to unmake what we make. Some monsters wear dust. A bandaged figure lurches out of a museum case and into the comic frame of a child's mind. The mummy in our posters is mostly a joke, linen, grown, outstretched arms. But beneath the laughter is an old unease about graves opened and treasures looted, about the disrespect the living show the dead when curiosity outruns reverence. The mummy is the conscience of archaeology's heedless hour. Halloween borrows him to say, "Honour is a threshold too." Then, shambling with the weird democracy of a crowd, the zombie arrives, the opposite of elegance, a horror of repetition. Its earlier stories come braided with the pain of enslavement and the theft of will. Later, modern fables transpose the monstrosity into plagues and mindless contagion, into a fear that society could unravel simply by one person, forgetting how to be a person, and the forgetting spreading faster than any remedy. The zombie is a parable about habits without souls, about days done on autopilot until the light behind the eye goes out. In the Halloween parade, the zombie is the dance step we practice when we need to laugh at our own worst routines, and then, perhaps, choose otherwise in the morning. There is also the double man, the gentleman at war with himself, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a parlour trick that became a diagnosis. Victorian streets clean themselves under strict lamps. Behind those lamps, men learn to carry their shadows more tightly folded. Stevenson simply let the shadow put on a hat and walk ahead. The lesson is not to fear sophistication, but to question partitions. How many masks can kindness wear before it forgets its face? How many rooms can one heart be sliced into before the doors no longer know how to lock? Around these anchor figures swarm the local familiars, headless riders who keep appointments with bridges at midnight, black dogs whose eyes are coals drawn from the village smithy, lake shapes that rise exactly high enough to be remembered and then sink with a politeness that leaves no proof, the bogies that inherit different names in different towns, always the monosyllables that could be hissed at children when the fire was too tired to babysit. Each has a birth certificate in story, and each was hired for a job a community needed done. Keep the young from the marsh, keep the thieves from the lane, keep the unspoken sorrow from eating the whole table. The job titles changed. The payroll, respect mixed with fear, stayed the same. Monsters are not simply for scaring, they are grammar. They conjugate our anxieties into forms we can pronounce, then into costumes we can wear and take off. The werewolf says, "This is what happens when appetite goes moon drunk." The vampire says, "This is the hunger that flatters itself into eternity." The creature stitched from ambition says, "This is what it looks like when knowledge makes something new and then refuses to raise it." The golem says, "This is the strength we ask for and the responsibility we forgot we would need." The zombie says, This is life without attention, the treadmill that takes you, smiling faintly, past your own front door. The mummy says, this is what it costs to touch the past without bowing first. Hyde says, this is the coin the mirror demands if you pretend too long, and yet the grammar changes us too. When a child puts on fangs or fur, the first miracle is laughter, the second is empathy. To play a monster is to flirt with a force, and then to learn you can step back into your own name. It is rehearsal and antidote. Shake hands with the shadow, call it pretend, and it will often behave. Even adults who swear they're past such things will sometimes feel a relief when the mask hides their practiced expressions and lets a simpler face look out. Brave for a few hours, or silly, or stern and safe. A community that plays together at fear is also practicing care. Doors open, treats exchange hands, lanterns multiply. The night acquires a map of welcome. Our era gives the old company new clothes. Cinnamon streaming dress the vampire in chiaroscuro and teach the zombie a choreography. The werewolf inherits therapists and lunar apps. The stitched creature faces lawsuits and confessional podcasts. But the heart beneath the costume still beats with the old work. To warn, to teach, to let a town displace its dread for a night and then repossess it gently. Wiser. Monsters are metaphors we're allowed to touch. In October, we run our hands along their edges and are reminded where our boundaries and our longings meet. The street lamp hum deepens. A moth writes its small cursive around the bulb. From a porch, laughter spills, befriended by cinnamon and the soft slap of a screen door. In the park, a yard ghost skates its white sheet in place, endlessly falling toward a tidy death it never quite reaches. A plastic skeleton lounges in a chair like someone who has learned to enjoy simplicity. Everywhere, the symbols do their patient work. They take the grand headaches of existence, mortality, appetite, estrangement, hubris, and miniaturize them until a hand can carry one to the next house and say trick or treat without trembling. But monsters also tell us something bright. What we fear is often a wish wearing a disguise. The werewolf wants freedom without cost. The vampire wants intimacy without risk. The creature wants belonging without history. Hyde wants pleasure without witness. The zombie wants relief from choice. Seen clearly, those are all versions of a temptation the human heart knows too well. To step outside of a relationship and still demand its gifts. Halloween does not resolve the temptation. It nods toward it, dresses it in felt and plastic, shares candy with it, and sends it home before midnight. The ritual is a boundary in action. Yes, we will speak with fear, eat with fear, laugh with fear, but fear will not tuck us in. We will do that for each other. Listen. Somewhere a dog barks at a costume it cannot pass. A gull laughs late at the river as if it were summer. A bicycle bell rings, then rings again, undecided. Footsteps hurry and then slow and then stop at a door where knockers have been busy all evening. Another shadow nudges the lamplight's edge and thinks better of it. The night is full but not crowded. The company has manners. Even the monsters practice courtesy. They are, after all, ours, made by us, for us, to do the big, clumsy work of making fear bearable and desire visible. We have walked with them as with neighbours who are both exasperating and essential. We have nodded to the wolf's yellow patience and the vampire's grave attire. We have tipped our hats to Lightning's orphan and Clay's bodyguard. We have let our knees go a little soft before the shambling crowd and then remembered we have better rhythms in us. The lesson, if we can call it that, arrives without a chalkboard. Name what hunts you, and its teeth often dull. Play with what tempts you, and you sometimes learn to decline it with a smile. Be kind to what is cast out, and you may find a home for what in yourself has been wandering without a coat. At the end of the block, a triangle of light falls from an open door onto the step. In that light, hands transfer sugared peace from bowl to bag, and voices practice the small ceremonies of gratitude. These too are the night's magic, rituals that knit a neighbourhood until even its hauntings feel companioned. And that is where our path bends next, from the creatures that crowd the threshold to the doings of the hands that hold it steady. For the monsters do not arrive to be worshipped. They arrive to be greeted, teased, tamed by custom. Beyond this lamp and this hedge, in kitchens and on porches, old gestures survive under new names. Lanterns with carved faces, doors answered by blessing, loaves shared in the lanes. We will go there now, to the hearthwork of Halloween, to the traditions that keep the dark friendly and teach the night to remember us kindly. Chapter 5. Halloween. Traditions and Rituals. The wind worries at the eaves while you set a pumpkin on the table, its skin cool as a pond at dusk. A candle waits beside it like a small sun on pause. Knife, bowl, spoon, simple tools, elemental. You draw a circle around the stem and lift, and the lid comes free with a soft, fibrous sigh. The scent is immediate and clean, wet string, raw earth, the green whisper of vines that only yesterday were maps across a field. Seeds slide into the bowl with the sound of rain beginning. The room narrows to lamplight and orange curve, to the scrape of a spoon pulling threads free. Outside, the wind turns a corner and forgets a leaf there. Somewhere down the block, a child tests a laugh and finds it bright enough to keep. This is the hearthwork of Halloween, the domestic choreography that turns fear into friendliness and the dark into a room with chairs. The pumpkin will soon wear a face. It will be both guardian and greeter. Before pumpkins, though, long before this continent learned the grammar of October, there were turnips and mangel wurzels, pale, lanterned and severe. In Irish lanes and on Scottish thresholds, people carved fierce, comic or sorrowful masks into those root bodies and set a coal inside. The light could be a ward, a guide, a joke, a story. Sometimes the face was a warning to mischief. Not here, not tonight. Sometimes it was a promise to travellers. Someone keeps watch. A story clung to those lanterns the way smoke clings to clothes. The tale of a man called Jack who tricked a stranger at a crossroads and later discovered the stranger was nothing so simple as a man. When Jack died, heaven refused him. Hell, tricked once, refused him too. He was given instead a single ember to wander with and a turnip to cradle its glow. He became a lesson about cleverness and loneliness, about the way bargains made in jest are still bargains. Whether Jack ever walked a lane or only the human need for meaning did, the lantern kept its work, a small circle of safety carried into weather. When Irish hands came to America and found pumpkins large as moon fragments and tender to the blade, the ritual changed its fruit, but not its soul. The faces grew broader, the grins more expansive. An entire country learned almost overnight how to introduce itself to October with a lit smile. The ember turned to candle, the story to decoration, yet the threshold remained a place of ceremony. To carve is to choose a face for the night to meet, to decide what kind of welcome we will extend to the unknown that stands quietly at our step. And then, of course, there is the knock, or the bell, its small, excited vowel cutting through the evening. Children arrive disguised as mischief and moonlight, wolves who still say please, spectres with shoelaces, witches who remember their bedtime. The ritual is now so familiar that we forget how strange and beautiful it is. We open a door to a mask and give it sweetness. Some historians hear, beneath the laughter and the rustle of plastic, a memory of older rounds. In parts of medieval Europe, the poor and the young would go from house to house on the first days of November asking for alms or food, soul cakes, in exchange for prayers said for the dead of that household. In Scotland and Ireland, guisers carried the custom in a different glove, songs, jokes or verses offered at the door in return for fruit, nuts or coin. In each case, the threshold became a hinge between need and gift, between remembrance and provision. Trick or treat, the modern formula says, making mischief and mercy an either-or that is really a both-and. In practice, the threat is theatre, the treat the true grammar. But the old logic shows through. Honour the visitor, and the visitor will honour your house. Blessing traded for blessing. Hospitality rehearsed until it becomes muscle memory. Some years the door opens not only to masks but to causes. Children carry small orange boxes for charity. A community enlarges its kindness by attaching it to a knight already fluent in exchange. In the kitchen, the seeds you scooped from the pumpkin toss in a sheen of oil and salt. In the oven, they will learn to be golden and audible, a cereal of tiny symbols. Food always joins ceremony. It keeps the body from feeling left out while the spirit works. In other rooms and other decades, a fruit bread, barmbrack, was sliced thin and considered carefully. Charms hid within its crumb, a coin for prosperity, a ring for romance, a pea for patience, a stick for a journey or a warning. Fortune-telling was play, and yet play knows how to plant a seed of hope. Apples bobbed in pails and tubs, a face leaned toward water and found courage in its own reflection. A peel thrown over a shoulder curled into the letter of a future beloved's name, or into nothing at all, which is also a kind of answer. Hazelnuts cracked near the fire to judge the constancy of pears. Nuts that popped apart warned of love too quick to last. Those that burned together promised steadier heat. Not every house plays at futures anymore, but the instinct remains, to ask the season for a hint, to let the harvest's end be a mirror for the heart. And not every house confines its honouring to merriment. In some places, quiet kitchens, back porches, people lay an extra setting and call it an old name, the dumb supper, not for foolishness, but for the vow of silence kept while it is eaten. The living share a meal in the company of the dead, speaking inwardly the words they wish to say, and letting the simple acts of passing bread and lifting forks become prayer. A photograph finds its way to the table. A name is said softly once, then held like a candle behind the ribs. Whether anything crosses from the other room to this one is not the point. The point is that memory is fed, and gratitude too. In the yard, bonfires still bloom, legal, contained, neighbourly. Children learn the way smoke writes on the tongue, the way it braids itself into hair. Fire is the first language festivals learn. It speaks in verbs everyone knows. We gather, we warm, we watch. The fire says, nothing can burn all night without being fed. It says, all light has a cost, and the cost is gladly paid. In old fields, cattle passed between twin flames and were blessed. In city, parks now, people pass between strings of lanterns and feel something not so different. A corridor of safety built of ordinary incandescence. The match is small, the trust is large. Costumes turn the street into a classroom where roles are tried on and shed. Once upon a Samhain, the mask was a tactic. Confuse what hunts you by unmooring your face from your name. Later, in All Hallows, the mask learned a second job. Dress as a virtue to learn how it fits. Now, in Halloween's carnival, children and adults experiment with courage, gentleness, flamboyance, silliness. A shy child discovers that a cape can be a spine. A serious man, lent a rubber nose, finds that gravity has its limits and laughter its mercy. Even fear is softened by cloth and paint. The ghost on the porch is a sheet and a squeak. The ogre at the corner store is their neighbour with a talent for eyebrows. This is pedagogy by lantern light. Practice the edges of yourself in a night that promises to return you safely to your softer outline. Colours speak too in this grammar of gentleness. Orange is harvest, squash, candle, ember, marigold, a warmth that keeps the porch bright. Black is the honest dark around it, the mystery we choose not to bully with stadium lamps. Together they make a truce, the seen and the unseen sharing a frame. Paper bats, cut with careful scissors, settle into that truce and do not bite. A skeleton smiles without malice from a window. He has laid down his scythe and taken up a mug of cocoa. Even the faux gruesome knows its manners on this night. There is room for thrill, but not for harm. Other customs travel and mingle. Doorways collect chrysanthemums and candles. Porches become small altars without anyone naming them so. Some families write the names of their gone ones on slips of paper and fold them into the pocket of a jacket before stepping into the wind. The names make a warmth that fleece alone cannot. On sidewalks, chalk messages shine damply with the weather's blessing. Be safe, sweet dreams, see you next year. Doorframes learn new codes. A light that means welcome. A teal pumpkin that means we have something gentle for those who need gentleness differently. The night becomes navigable because neighbours decide it should be. Games stitch the hours. In a parlour, a story circle takes its old seat. One voice begins, another braids in, and fright is measured not by gore but by atmosphere, the morale of a match that must not go out. A charity-haunted house offers staged alarms, good training for the laughter that follows when people discover their startled response can be a source of joy. A front yard becomes a riddle trail, a garage, a miniature theatre where puppets with paper teeth tell jokes with perfect timing. Children leave with bags heavier than their arms expected. Adults leave with something less weighable, a sense of having been part of a civic spell that, for one evening, made trust visible. We might tell a more mercantile story here, about how candy learned to be the festival's coin, and how shops decorate months in advance to teach desire its lines. There is truth in that telling. Economies always discover holidays as faithfully as holidays discover economies. But to stop there would be to miss the backstage where the quieter rituals live. The neighbour who tapes a paper ghost into the window, so the block's newest toddler will have something friendly to point at on morning walks. The teenager who puts on a silly costume in order to be less frightening to small children than his height would otherwise insist upon. The porch where a bowl is left for the latecomers and the sign says, "Take two, and if you are the last, leave kindness for the next." These are minor liturgies, improvised and faithful. Traditions evolve because needs do. Some families take their costumes and candy to a school parking lot or a church lawn. Trunks opened like portable porches. The night condensed into a single well-lit hour. The reasons are practical. Safety, time, weather. The ritual, however, remains the same. A sequence of thresholds and gifts, a rehearsal of greeting and being greeted. In other neighbourhoods, the ritual moves forward an hour for small children, or stretches later for teenagers who need a place to practice being nearly grown under a sky that remembers they were small. The point is not uniformity, it is belonging. Everywhere, lamps and candles make little arguments against despair. On the stoop, you set your jack-o'-lantern in its place and strike a match. The wick stutters, catches, learns its glow. The face you carved, crooked, kind, mischievous, leans itself into the dark, and the dark leans back with interest. You taste salt on a seed and find it exactly itself. When the bell rings, you answer with a bowl and a smile you didn't have to carve. Voices rise and fall in that old exchange. "What are you?" the door asks. "Brave," the mask replies. "Are you alone?" the porch wonders. "Not tonight," the street answers, and the laughter that follows would make any winter hesitate. Beneath all this, beneath the glitter and plastic and glue, lies a simple human desire that the ancients would recognise with immediate tenderness, to keep the line between worlds courteous, to offer to the unknown a light and a sweetness, to receive from it in return a lesson in how not to hoard either. When we carve, we practice giving shape to fear until it shows its teeth and we call them handsome. When we knock, we practice asking for blessing without shame. When we give, we practice being the sort of house that a traveller, living, dead, or merely tired, will remember. And there are quieter rituals yet, almost too small to see. The moment after the last door closes, when a child, out of costume now, counts and shares and discovers that generosity did not make the pile smaller, it made the room larger. The minute in the kitchen when a photograph is lifted from a frame and set by the sink so the washing up is done with company, the walk the dog insists upon in the depth of night, under the thinner stars of November, when the neighbourhood is again itself and the jack-o'-lanterns have gone to ember and then to memory. The path home learned by foot and streetlight, and the promise of warm water and a towel. We have, with these modest engines, knife and candle, doorbell and bowl, song and seed, made a festival that dignifies both fear and kindness. The old customs of warding and honouring have not vanished. They have found new forms within city grids and cul-de-sacs, apartments and farmhouses. If you listen, you can still hear the hill fire in the oven's hush, the knave's bell in the chime by your door, the cottage's herb smoke in the pumpkin's clean scent. The past is not behind us. It holds the bowl while we stir. And now, with lanterns stencilled on the dark and steps mapped by laughter, we stand again at the threshold the season loves, the place where explanation grows quiet and meaning begins to move in bare feet. What are these rituals teaching us, beyond their good manners? What lies in the small ceremony of light and gift that keeps drawing us to the door? Perhaps it is this, that there is a veil in the world, not to frighten us, but to soften the passage between breathing and memory, between the names we speak and the ones we keep folded inward. We will open that curtain gently in the next room and see what the night, patient, courteous, ancient, has always meant when it says, "The world is larger and nearer than you think." Chapter 6. The Veil Between Worlds. What Halloween teaches us. The fire has settled into its patient red, a low constellation of coals inside the grate. Outside, the wind moves like a careful hand along the siding, testing every seam for a story. The moon, one pale coin well spent, hangs above the roofs and gives each chimney a thin silver spine. Your room is warm and a little dim, wheat-coloured with lamplight. On the table, a jack-o'-lantern keeps its mild watch. The candle inside it ticks and softens. Its carved smile falters into something almost thoughtful. Somewhere farther down the street, a last bell rings. The hour climbs into its coat and goes out. This is the hour when Halloween forgets its grin and remembers its heart. Costumes are asleep on chairs and door handles. Masks rest upside down like empty moons cupping silence. Bowls are stacked and rinsed. The good spoons have forgiven their work. The night breathes more slowly, and, in that slowing, the old lesson arrives with its familiar gentleness. We live at the edge of more than one room. We always have. The festival only lifts the curtain a finger's width, so that for an evening, we feel the draught and call it by its name. We call it a veil because cloth knows how to soften an edge without erasing it. A veil lets shapes remain themselves while learning a new kindness. It lets light work with shadow instead of against it. The Celts named this thinness at Samhain, when the year folded its bright half into its dark half, and the dead were thought to walk among their own. The church gave the thinness other syllables, All Hallows, All Souls, and taught a village to say holy as easily as it said harvest. The modern porch turns the thinness into hospitality, a bowl offered, a laugh exchanged, the smallest sacraments. Each age adds a layer and none is wasted. The cloth is woven from bonfire and bell, from herb smoke and hymn, from plastic fangs and real kindness. If the veil is metaphor, it is also daily experience. Think of your breath on a winter morning, how it becomes visible for a moment and then returns to the unseen where it still, of course, is. Think of the way a name can fill a room long after the one who wore it has gone, how a photograph glows without electricity. Think of the hush that gathers at bedsides and thresholds and graves, and how language, clumsy, brave, sends out words like lanterns and waits for them to come back lit. We live with this thinness in small, unadvertised ways, in memory, in mercy, in the sudden intuition that arrives like a bird and leaves before you can categorize its feathers, in the way sorrow and gratitude braid their hair when no one is looking. Halloween gives us rehearsal. It lets the body practice living with the veil without panic. The children learn to knock at a door that might open onto anything and to stand there smiling anyway. Adults learn to open that door with their hands full of sweetness, not suspicion. The street learns how to be a soft river flowing from porch to porch, how to carry strangers toward recognition. Fear is given something to do with its hands. Hold this lantern, tie this cape, say these words, and, occupied thus, fear becomes less greedy. The night shapes itself around the training. In that training, a truth unfolds that is older than any custom, yet perfectly modern. Much of what matters cannot be proved. It can only be practiced. Gratitude does not submit to measurement. It submits to repetition. Courage is not an argument. It is a habit. Belonging is not legislated. It is enacted by 100 small gestures that, taken together, teach a neighbourhood to trust itself again. Halloween's rituals are simple. Carve, knock, open, share, thank, walk, wave, remember. And they are sufficient to move a people 1 inch closer to the place where the veil feels like a friend and not a threat. It is tempting to think the thinness belongs to cemeteries and churches and hilltops only, but it thrums in ordinary rooms. A nurse tapes a paper pumpkin in a hospital window, so a child tethered to beeping machines knows the season has not forgotten him. A granddaughter sets a small candle by an old photograph and reads a recipe card in her grandmother's hand as if the ink still warmed the page. In an apartment corridor where strangers have learned each other's footsteps, but not each other's first, names, a bowl appears with a note in crooked kindness. Take what you need, leave what you can. None of these is a miracle, each is. The veil does not demand spectacle, it loves attention. What then does Halloween teach us when it is most itself? First, that fear is not an enemy to be defeated, but an animal to be handled. It startles, it tugs, it wants to run the room. Give it tasks and rules, put it in a costume, walk it door to door until its breath slows. Second, that death is not simply a door that shuts, but a hallway. The living may still walk with memory and gratitude. We cannot call our dead back and should not, but we can keep company with them by saying their names and keeping their recipes and learning their good defiance. Third, that communities are maintained not by sentiment but by ceremony, the little, repeated courtesies that make doors safer to knock upon and streets safer to cross. The monsters of the last chapter were never only monsters, they were metaphors we could handle without burning our hands. The same is true of the veil. It is not a curtain pulled by gods, it is a way of noticing. When a porch light goes on, and a masked child is welcomed into that circle, the ordinary is briefly consecrated. When a lantern burns on a stoop and the wind asks it to fail and it does not, endurance is made visible. When a household lays an extra plate or lifts an extra prayer, the map of the family redraws itself to include the unseen coastline. Perhaps this is the festival's deepest courtesy. It lets us treat our uncertainties as honoured guests rather than as burglars. We are most of the time taught to master what we can and to ignore what we cannot. Halloween offers a third path, to befriend what we cannot master. The veil is thin between certainty and curiosity, and the night invites us to stand there without reaching for a louder lamp. Notice how the dark holds your house without swallowing it. Notice how the sky does not hurry you. Notice how your own breath, such a small engine, warms the air enough for you to be kind. You do not need to understand the cosmos to share sugar at your door. You do not need to settle a doctrine to set a photograph by a candle. Modest gestures suffice, and yet the festival is not naive. It remembers witch hunts and foolish panics, remembers how a community can harm its own in the name of making the veil behave. Halloween at its best is an inoculation against such harm. It takes the raw materials of dread and play and makes a ceremony that honours both without weaponizing either. By laughing at what could frighten us, we're not trivializing it. We're refusing to let it recruit us into cruelty. The child who learns to say thank you to a stranger in a mask is practicing an art many adults have forgotten. The adult who learns to be gentle to a frightened child in a ridiculous outfit is practicing a politics the news rarely imagines. Listen to the textures that have guided us, the hills, bonfire, the nave's bell, the cottage's kettle, the street's lamp, the pumpkin's glow. Each is a way of holding the dark without breaking it. Each says, we live with endings, we live with thresholds, we live most of all with each other. The festival does not dissolve grief, it gives grief company. It doesn't cancel winter, it stocks the pantry of the heart. It does not rescue us from mortality, it teaches us to walk more kindly with our days. There is another lesson, quieter, and perhaps the most tender. Joy is not frivolous. Joy is a tool that cuts keys for locked rooms. The laughter on the porch is not an interruption of the sacred, it is one of its languages. Children shrieking at a friendly jump scare, neighbours swapping recipes, someone complimenting a costume with the gravity of a museum guard. These are not extras. They are the ritual's ballast. The veil does not ask us to whisper always. Sometimes it asks us to giggle until the air learns we're safe together. The candle inside your pumpkin gutters and then steadies. Your own breath hitchhikes the room and vanishes, but you trust the lungs that carry you will fill again. On the mantle, the photograph, if you have set one there, seems plainer than any miracle, and yet more nourishing. You can name the face, you can tell the story, you cannot bring the person back. Between what you can and what you cannot, there is a way to stand. Halloween teaches that stance, soft knees, open hands, a willingness to be silly and solemn without apology. In the morning, the world will put its practical clothes on. Leaves will need raking. The school run will rehearse its ordinary heroism. Email will ask for your spine. The plastic spider will lose a leg and you will mend it or bin it. The lantern will find its way to the compost or the porch's far corner, where old holidays fold themselves like tents. The veil will thicken, not because the other room has retreated, but because the daylight has returned to its useful bossiness. Yet the practice you kept tonight will persist. A door will open more easily next week. A fear will take orders better. A name will be said with less ache and more gratitude. This, then, is Halloween's curriculum when we listen without hurry. Make peace with edges. Be courteous to mysteries. Let kindness be your cleverness. Allow joy to be your ritual. Keep company with your dead by serving your living well. You're permitted to not know. You're permitted to not fix it all. You're invited, strange, blessed word, to belong in a world that is larger than you can prove and nearer than you can say. Outside, the moon slides a little toward the west, and the wind loses interest in arguments. Somewhere a dog, last on the street to sleep, declares his patrol complete and curls into the geometry of trust. You pinch the wick with damp fingers and watch the jack-o'-lantern learn its darker smile. The room widens in the sudden absence of flame. The dark is kind. In that kindness, the veil's work is finished for now. It has taught, it has held, it has made the ordinary holy for a while, and then folded itself back into the seams. But one task remains, and it is human. We must close the night without closing our hearts. We must turn toward the bed and carry with us whatever small light we've learned to make. The festival, courteous as ever, offers a benediction. Take what you need, leave what you can. In the next and final chapter, we will do exactly that. Gather our lanterns, sweep the porch, thank the night for its patience, and walk the slow path to farewell. The world will sleep, and we with it, but not before we say what gratitude has been rehearsing all evening. Good work, good neighbours, good night. Good